All right. Welcome, welcome. Good night. And welcome back once again. This is Amuna Yisrael, Solonomics 101, the LEV Project. And I know I haven't been reading for the whole week. I said again, I was on Facebook Live. So those who are joining us over there, hopefully you will join us over here. If you do, the link is in the box underneath this video for the story that we are reading. If you would like to read, I keep saying it, and I know we have some readers out there, but people just don't seem to want to read. Don't know why. But nonetheless, we are on chapter 11. So I'm going to try to bust some of this out real quick so that we can mosey on down the road here. Wait, hold on. So let me see if it is that I can find. See if it is that I can find the link. I did put it in the box, but it seems to be bringing up something else. I was speaking over on Facebook quickly about patience. You know, sometimes when we go live is not scripted. Live is not you know, where I usually do the videos and I'm editing. Live is live. So sometimes we have to understand that that's exactly what it is. If someone is looking for something and if somebody can't find some information, you know, having some patience with that individual as they look for what it is that they're trying to find is you know, is something that is necessary, especially because we're doing a service. The service that we're doing is bringing buried information that oftentimes is not brought to the forefront And when you're digging, you know, it takes a lot of patience to be able to come out and present something that people haven't heard or seen in a long time. It takes a lot of patience to as we can see here, waddle through some of these things that we feel is not relevant, basically. And hold on one second as I try to find a name. For some reason, the link that's in the box is not working. A girl's life in Virginia before the war. Hold on one second. In Virginia before the war. Yes, so I say that to say, come on now. What happened to the link? For some reason, the link is not working. Let me look it up on Google. Let me go another way. So unless you've actually done it where it is that you are actually multitasking, you know, sometimes, you know, things are so much done for us. Let me put Google Books. We think, oh man, I could do that. That's easy. But when you have to actually multitask, talking to the people, finding what you're looking for and bringing it all together, it's not always that easy. So once again, I want to thank you for your patience as this thing has disappeared. Let me put her name in. But what happened was we usually use Doc South and, oh, here it is. And before Doc South, for some reason, the way they uploaded it, it wasn't doing well. And so we had to switch over to this. And it's a good thing that it was free on Google Books. And so I've found the link now. If you're not able to read along, just let me know and then we can get to it. I believe we were on chapter 11. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Patience is very important. Even if somebody works for you, sometimes people think, oh, because I'm paying you, I get to be indignant, I get to be impatient, I get to be belligerent. No, actually you don't. Just because you're paying someone doesn't give you the right to treat them in any nasty way. Furthermore, if somebody's receiving, and I still believe whether somebody's paying or not, you know, whatever service, whether you're getting paid or not, you still bring forth your best, you know, because first and foremost, before you give on to people, you give on to the Creator. So with that said, I always try to bring forth my best, and in such a forum where you're doing a service. You're literally doing a community service, and even in some places, community service gets some kind of subsidy that allows you to continue. And a lot of people that we see and expect and begin to depend on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, a lot of times they're not getting any subsidy. And so, you know, it's real that our expectations are unrealistic. I think I'm up to page 11, in chapter 11. which on this will be page, I'll tell you right now, because I'm going through this. Yeah, page 10, it'll be 121 on the Google Play. So let me go ahead and get started here. I'll put it in the box, so if anybody's following along with this. 1 second. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. You ever been to the cash register and the person is new and you're fumbling and they're all nervous, and then you tell them, just relax, it's okay. You know what I'm saying? And that takes a load off of their mind, because they're not. And then I'm not new to this, but again, that little bit of something will help somebody in their day. That pressure of somebody wanting and demanding of them right now. If we can alleviate those things one to another, and especially amongst children, when you're dealing with children, the same thing. And I'm putting it in the box, and there you go. You should be able to read along. So once again, thank you for your patience. And chapter 11. So not far from Greenfield was a place called Rustic Lodge. This house, surrounded by a forest of green old oaks, was not large or handsome, but its inmates were ladies and gentlemen of the old English style. The grandmother, Miss Burrell, about 90 years of age, had in her youth been one of the belles of the Williamsburg court in old colonial days. A daughter of Sir Dudley Digges, and descended from English nobility, that she had been accustomed to the best society. Her manners and conversation were dignified and attractive. Among reminiscences of colonial times, she remembered Lord Boultertort, of whom she related interesting incidents. If you're picking up in the middle of the story, let me just say we are like deep. We are again on chapter 11. If you missed, you can go back and listen to the replays. We're listening to Latita. She's a European woman in Virginia before the war. She's older when she's recounting these stories, and she's trying to give us an insight, or her estimation of the realness of the South. Once again, we've read reviews on the book, and it's apparent that she's misremembering things. It really didn't go the way she's saying it went, because a lot of the brutalities, a lot of the realities of slavery have disappeared in her narrative. But nonetheless, it's very interesting to read. So this is why we're reading it. The son of this old lady, about 60 years of age, and the proprietor of the estate, was a true picture of the old English gentleman. His manners, conversation, thread, cambric, shrill frills, cuffs, and long queue tied with black ribbon made the picture complete. His two daughters, hold on, let you see my screen here. There you go. His two daughters, young ladies of refinement, had been brought up by their aunt and grandmother to observe strictly all the proprieties of life. This establishment was proverbial for its order and method, the most systematic rules being enforced everywhere. The meals were served punctually at the same instant every day. Old Aunt Nellie always dressed and undressed her mistress at the same hour. The cook's gentleman tapped at the chamber door, called the mistress to an interview with the functionary at the same moment every moment, an interview which lasted half an hour and never being repeated during the day, resulting in the choicest dinners and breakfasts and suppers. Exactly at the same hour every morning, the old gentleman's horse was saddled, and he entered the neighboring village so promptly as to enable some of the inhabitants to set their clocks by him. This family had possessed great wealth in Eastern Virginia during the colonial government, under which many of its members held high offices. But impoverished by high living, entertaining company, and a heavy British debt, they had been reduced to their possessions to about 50 Negroes, with only money enough to purchase this plantation, upon which they had retired from the gay and charming society of Williamsburg. So these people, they used to be top of top, and they fell off. Okay, trying to run with the Joneses. They carried with them, however, some remains of their former grandeur: old silver, old jewelry, old books, old and well-trained servants, an old English coach, which was the curiosity of all other vehicular curiosities, how the family ever climbed into it or got out of it, and how the driver ever reached the dizzy height upon which he sat was a mystery of my childhood. But although egg-shaped and suspended in mid-air, this coach had doubtless in its day been one of the considerable renown drawn by four horses with footmen, postilion, and driver in English livery. How sad must have been its reflections on finding itself shorn of these respectable surroundings, and after the revolution, drawn by two Republican horses with footman and driver dressed in Republican jeans. A great uncle of this family, unlike the coach, never would become republicanized. And this obstinate loyalty to the English crown, with his devotion to everything English, gained for him the title English Louis, by which name he is spoken of in the family to this day. An old lady told me not long ago that she remembered when a child the arrival of English Louis at the rustic one night, and his conversation as they sat around the fire, how he deplored a republican form of government and the misfortunes which will result from it, saying, all may go smoothly for about 70 years, when civil war will set in. First, it will be about these Negro slaves we have around us, and after that, it will be something else. And how true English Louis' prediction has proven. By the way, history, the Republicans, again, as you're seeing here, this part is true, historically were Northerners. And the Democrats, who is funny enough, a lot of melanated people like to vote for today, were the slaveholding class. So that's something, if anybody knows anything about that, that's something to look into. B girl, what's going on? Good evening. I'm usually using my phone. I can only listen. That's no problem. Great to catch. Hey, what's up, Person Kid? Person Kid been with us for a minute now from a lot of the narrative. So it's good to see you, and good to see you, B girl. So definitely it's about listening. So, you know, I don't have my screen up. It's all about listening. So that's perfectly fine with me. If you guys can hold on for me 1 second, I'll be right with you. What? 1 minute.
Call from D.
All right. Sorry about that. Let me give you back the screen here. And so, yeah, Democrats were notoriously Southern slaveholders. But it says here, they made a note, on the route up to Rustic was a small village called Liberty, approaching which and hearing the same English Louis swore he would not pass through any such little Republican town, and turning his horses traveled many miles out of this way to avoid it. So that's how much he detested the Republican form of government. So that's what she went so far to say. Going on, doubtless this gentleman was avoided and proscribed on account of his English proclivities. For at the day, the spirit republicanism and hatred to England ran high, so that an old gentleman, one of our relatives who I will well remember, actually took from his parlor walls his coat of arms, which had been brought by his grandfather from England, and carried it out in his yard, built a fire, and collecting his children around it to see it burn, said, "Thus let everything English perish." So this is another insight between the beef between America, or those, though they were Englishmen and Scottish and French, but there is still an underlying beef between what is now America, which is the what's the word I'm looking for here? The wayward son of England, so to say. And you can, again, if you're not understanding all that with the Revolutionary War and what happened, definitely check that out, because all that plays into slavery, the abolition of slavery, and everything else that goes from there. Should I say what I think of this proceeding, I would not be considered perhaps a true Republican patriot. I must add a few words to my previous mention of Smithfield in Montgomery County, the county which flows with healing waters. Smithfield, like Greenfield, is owned by the descendants of the first white family who settled there after the Indians. I love the way she puts that. They nothing about how you brutally, anyway. And its verdant pastures, noble forests, and mountain streams and springs form a prospect wondrously beautiful. This splendid estate descended to three brothers of the Preston family, who equally divided it, the eldest keeping the homestead and others building attractive homes on their separate plantations. The old homestead was quite antique in appearance. Inside, the high mantelpieces reaching nearly to the ceiling, which was also high, and the high wainscoting together with the old furniture made a picture of the olden time. When I first visited this place, the old grandmother, when 80 years of age, was living. She, like the old lady at Rustic, had been a belle in Eastern Virginia in her youth. When she married the owner of Smithfield 60 years before, she made the bridal gaunt from Norfolk to this place on horseback, 200 miles. Still exceedingly intelligent and interesting, she entertained us with various incidents of her early life and wished to hear all the old songs which she had then heard and sung herself. When I was married, said she, and first came to Smithfield, my husband's sisters met me in the porch and were shocked at my pale and delicate appearance. One of them, whispering to her brother, asked, "Why did you bring the ghost up here?" And now, continuing the old lady, I have outlived all those who were in the house that day, and all my own and my husband's family. This was certainly an evidence of the health restoring properties of the water and climate in this region. The house of these The house of these three brothers were filled with company winter and summer, making within themselves a delightful society. The visitors at one house were equally visitors at the others, and succession of dinner and evening parties from one to the other made it difficult for a visitor to decide at which particular house he was staying. And as she said before, this was the form of entertainment. So you always had to be prepared for people to pop up at your house for a week, for 2 weeks, sometimes even a month, without even giving you a heads up. Like, this was the hospitality of the day. This is how you got rank in society, by how well you entertained your guests. And so she's, again, and this is what the Europeans were doing. Thank you so much. This is my first time following, but I enjoy listening to you on the Gentleman Talk Show. Okay, thank you so much, B Girl. Thank you so much. What we're reading right now is A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War. I put the link in the box so that we can follow along. This is, I think, the fifth installment. I think this is the fifth installment. And the 97th episode of the LEV Project. So we're almost 3 installments away from the 100th episode. We've been reading from January 1. For those who are new and who have just joined us, we've read a number of narratives. This happens to be that narrative of a European. We've read Charles Ball. We've read Harriet Jacobs. We've read Lewis Hughes. We've read some narratives from European slave masters. And, so we're getting a whole eclectic look at the institution of slavery. And the purpose of the LEV Project is to hopefully walk away with a better understanding of the institution. A lot of times we just look at it, chattel slavery, from, again, the position of the oppressed. But the reality is that when speaking to people who you know, as well as people in other class within that slave system, everybody did not see the institution the same way, because there were different people who benefited differently. So, are you eating ketchup? So I say that to say, welcome to the LEV Project. And again, if you missed any of those videos, feel free to go back and view them at your leisure. So I'm going to go on here. It says, one of these brothers, Colonel Robert Preston, had married a lovely lady from South Carolina, whose perfection of character and disposition endeared her to everyone who knew her. Everybody loved her at sight, and better she was known, the more she was loved. Her warm heart was ever full of other people's troubles or joys, never thinking of herself. In her house, many an invalid was cheered by her tender care, and many a drooping heart revived by her bright Christian spirit. Again, she has repainted a lot of history. She never omitted an opportunity of pointing the way to heaven. And although surrounded by all the allurement with gay society and wealth could bring, she did not swerve an instant from the quiet path along which she directed others. It goes on to say, in the midst of bright and happy surroundings, her thoughts and hopes were constantly centered upon the life above, and her conversation, which was the reflex of her heart, reverted ever to this theme, which she made attractive to old and young. So when you're not really hearing about the life of servants, you're hearing about this girl, this young girl. She's the benefactor. So all she's remembering is the parties, the food, the visits. You know, she's not remembering the pain, the sorrow, because that wasn't the part that she experienced. It's very important to understand this. Can you lay there? It says the eldest of these three brothers were William Ballard Preston, once Secretary of the Navy in the cabinet of President Taylor. In the region of the country just described and in counties beyond abound the finest mineral springs, one or more being found on every plantation. At one place there were 7 different springs, and the servant had a habit of asking the guests and families whether they would have before breakfast a glass of white sulfur, yellow sulfur, black sulfur, algahoney, alum, or limestone water. The old Greenbrier White Sulphur Springs was a favorite place of resort for Eastern Virginians and South Carolinians at a very early date, when it was accessible only by private conveyances. And all who passed the summer there went in private carriages. In this way, certain old Virginia and South Carolina families met every season. And these old people told us that society there was never so good after the railroads had stages brought all sorts of people from all sorts of places, quote unquote. This, of course, we knew nothing about from experience, and it sounded rather egotistical in the old people to say so, but that is what they said. So again, these Europeans, these rich people, they like these little one-off places that nobody knows about, and when all of the commoners come in, then it no longer has its prestige and its appeal. Indeed, these, quote, old folks, unquote, talk so much about what, quote, used to be in their day at the old White Sulphur that I found it hard to convince myself that I had not been bodily present, seeing with my eyes open certain knee-buckled old gentlemen with long queues and certain Virginia and South Carolinian belles attired in short-waisted, simple white cambrics who passed the summers there. These white cambrics we were told, had been carried in miniature trunks behind the carriages, and were considered with a few jewels and long black or white lace veil thrown over the head and shoulders, a complete outfit for the reigning belles. So she's describing, I believe, some kind of, I guess, swimming attire. Another curiosity was that these white cambric dresses, our grandmothers told us, required very little doing up. One such having been worn by Mrs. General Washington, so her granddaughter told me, a whole week without requiring washing. It must have been an age of remarkable women and remarkable cambrics. How little they dreamed then of an era when Saratoga trunks would be indispensable to ladies of much smaller means than Virginia and South Carolina belles. To reach these counties flowing with mineral waters, the families from Eastern Virginia and from South Carolina passed through a beautiful region of Virginia known as Piedmont. And those who had kinfolks or acquaintances there usually stopped to pay them a visit. Consequently, the Piedmont Virginians were generally too busy entertaining summer guests to visit the springs themselves. Indeed, why should they? No more salubrious climate could be found than their own, and no scenery more grand and beautiful. But it was necessary for the Tidewater Virginians to leave their homes every summer on account of chills and fevers. In the lovely Piedmont region, over which the peaks of Otter rear their giant heads and chains of blue mountains extend as far as eye can reach, were scattered many pleasant and picturesque homes. And in this section, my grandfather bought a plantation when the ancestral estate in the eastern part of the state had been sold to repay the British debt, which estates, homesteads, and tombstones with their quaint inscriptions are described in Bishop Meade's Old Churches and Families of Virginia. While the Tidewater Virginians were already practicing all the arts and wiles known to the highest English civilization, sending their sons to be educated in England and receiving therefore brocade silks and powdered wigs and dancing the minuet at the Williamsburg balls. They sound like they was having a grand old time, huh? With the families of the noblemen sent over to govern the colony. Piedmont was still a dense forest, the abode of Indians and wild animals. I like how she grouped Indians and wild animals together. It was not strange then that Piedmont Virginians never arrived at the opulent manner of living adopted by those on the James and York rivers, who, tradition tells us, went to such excess in high living as to have hams boiled in champagne, and of whom others amused and interesting tales have been handed down to us. Amusing, sorry. Although the latter were in the advance of Piedmont Virginians in wealth and social advantages, they were not superior to them in honor, virtues, kindness, and hospitality. It has been remarked that when natural scenery is picturesque, there is in the human character something to correspond. Impressions made on the retina are really made on the soul, and the mind becomes what it contemplates. The same author continues, a man is not only like what he sees, but he is what he sees. The noble old Highlander had mountains in his soul, whose towering peaks point heavenward, and lakes in his bosom, whose glassy surface reflects the skies, and foaming cataracts in his heart to beautify the mountainside and irrigate the vale. Keep in mind, she's talking about a girl's life in Virginia before the war. If you read Harriet Jacobs' narrative and you read this narrative side by side, both of them were girls before the war. You will get two different conversations, but I will continue. And if you missed it, you want to hear Harriet Jacobs' narrative, you can go ahead. I have a playlist, and I have them all under the playlist in sections, so you could definitely hear that. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put it in the box, and then we will be able to pop on over and check that out as well. So let's continue. So she's like you over here watching a beautiful painting, right? And evergreen firs and mountain pines that show life and verdure even under winter skies. On the other hand, he writes, the wandering nomad has a desert in his heart. Its dead level reflects heat and hate. A sullen, barren plain, no goodness, no beauty, no dancing wave of joy, no gushing rivulet of love, verdant hope, no verdant hope. And it is an interesting fact that those who live in countries where natural scenery inspires the soul and where the necessities of life bind it to a permanent home are always patriotic and high-minded. And those who dwell in desert are always what this word is? This word right here is real. Pusillanimous. Oh man, I'm gonna pusillanimous. Now you know I gotta look that up, right? That's that type of person. P-U-S-I-L-L-A. Hold up. P-U-S-I-L-L-A. Here we go. Let's see how you pronounce this word. See, this is how we learn and grow together. Pusillanimous. Thank you very much. Showing a lack of courage and determination. Pusillanimous. All right. Let's go back. They're always pusillanimous. These old school narratives they put you up on your vocabulary. So pusillanimous and groveling. And this is funny that who did she say wrote this? She's quoting an author writing this. And at the same time, these people who are very aware of this make sure that they put ghettos where you're not seeing picturesque landscapes, where you're not seeing, and this is a side note, I divert for a second, when you're not seeing all this natural scenery, where you're seeing concrete jungles. And these same people are going to turn around and ask the question, why are you like this? Why are you so angry? Why are you so violent? When they red tape you in your communities and make sure that you can't necessarily as a group of people live in a certain area. One family might be able to break out, but they're going to put you into spaces where that will create this, what she's talking about, desert. But then at the same time demonize you or villainize you because you don't have the means to live outside of these, quote, deserts. I want to go back and read a little bit what she said about the desert. She says, and those who dwell in the desert are always pusillanimous and groveling. Okay, she's quoting an author, but I'll continue. If what this author writes be true, and the character of the Piedmont Virginians accords with the scenery around them, how their hearts must be filled with gentleness and charity inspired by the landscape, which stretches far and fades in softness against the sky. How must their minds be filled with noble aspirations suggested by the everlasting mountain? How their souls must be filled with thoughts of heaven as they look upon the glorious sunset bathing the mountains in rose-colored light, with the towering peaks ever pointing heavenward and seeming to say, behold the glory of the world beyond. Beneath the shadow of the peaks were many happy homes and true hearts, and among these memory recalls none more vividly than Otterburn and its inmates. Otterburn was a residence of gentlemen, and his wife, who, having no children, devoted themselves to making their home attractive to visitors, in which they succeeded so well that they were rarely without company, for all who went once to see them went again and again. I'm going to read this note. It says, from this vicinity went 9 ministers who were eminent in their several churches, 2 Episcopal bishops, 2 Methodist bishops, 3 distinguished Presbyterian, and 3 Baptist divines of talent and fame. So she's talking about the area. Let's continue. This gentleman, Benjamin Donald, was a man of high character, his accomplishments, manner, and appearance marking him rare, one in a century. Above his fellow men in greatness of soul, he could comprehend nothing mean. Right. His stature was tall and erect, his features bold, his countenance open and impressive, his mind vigorous and cultivated, his bearing dignified but not haughty, his manners simple and attractive, his conversation so agreeable and enlivening that the dullest company became animated as soon as he came into the room. Truth and lofty character were unmistakably stamped upon him that day. That day's acquaintance convinced one he could be trusted forever. Brought up in Scotland, the home of his ancestors, and in him were blended the best points of Scott and Virginia character, strict integrity and whole-souled generosity and hospitality. For those who didn't hear the earlier episodes, she claimed that she never saw abuse. She claimed that she never saw anyone who misused their slaves. So you have to understand that when she's recounting this story, her recount is wild. And the only abuse that she did remember, she put it on a craftsman, a black, in quote unquote black melanated individual, and she said that it was him that was abusing the young boy. So just keep this in mind when we're listening to her recounting, but I'll continue. How many days and nights we passed at his house, and in childhood and in youth, how many hours were we entertained by his bright and intrusive conversation. Especially delightful was it to hear his stories of Scotland, which brought vividly before us pictures of its lakes and mountains and castles. How often did we listen to his account of the wedding tour to Scotland when he carried his Virginia bride to the old home at Greenock. And how often we laughed about the Scotch children, his nieces and nephews who, on first seeing his wife, clapped their hands and shouted, "Oh, mother, you are not glad oh, mother, are you not glad uncle did not marry a black woman?" Hearing he was to marry a Virginian, they expected to see a savage Indian or Negro. And some of the family who went to Liverpool to meet them and were looking through spyglasses when the vessel arrived and said they were sure the Virginia lady had come because they saw no one among the passengers dressed in a red shawl and gaudy bonnet like an Indian. From this, we thought that Europeans must be ignorant of our country and its inhabitants, and we have since learned that their children are purposely kept ignorant of facts in regard to America and its people. Among many other recollections of this dear old friend of Otterburn, I shall never forget a dream he told us one night, which so impressed us that before his death, we asked him to write it out, which he did, and as the copy is before me in his own handwriting, I will insert it here. About the time I became of age, I returned to Virginia for the purpose of looking after and settling my father's estate. 3 years thereafter, I received a letter from my only sister informing me that she was going to be married and pressed me in the most urgent manner to return to Scotland to be present at her marriage and to attend the drawing of the marriage contract. The letter gave me a good deal of trouble as it did not suit me to leave Virginia at that time. I went to bed one night thinking much on the subject, but soon fell asleep and dreamed that I landed in Greenock in night time and pushed for home thinking I would take my aunt and sister by surprise. When I arrived at the door, I found all still and quiet and the outdoor locked. I thought, however, that I had in my pocket my check key, with which I quietly opened the door and groped my way into the sitting room. But finding no one there, I concluded they had gone to bed. I then went upstairs to their bedroom and found that unoccupied. I then concluded they had taken possession of my bedroom in my absence, but not finding them there, became very uneasy about them. Then it Then it struck me that they might be in the guest chamber, a room downstairs kept exclusively for company. Upon going there, I found the door partially open. I saw my aunt removing the burning coals from the top of the grate preparatory to going to bed. My sister was sitting in the bed, and as I entered the room, she fixed her eyes upon me, but did not seem to recognize me. I approached towards her in an effort to make myself known, awoke, and found it all a dream. At breakfast next morning, I felt wearied and sick and could not eat, and told the family of my dream overnight. I immediately commenced preparing and in a very short time returned to Scotland. I saw my sister married, and she and her husband set off on their marriage jaunt. I guess that's their honeymoon. About a month thereafter, they returned, and at dinner I commenced telling them of my dream, but observed they had quit eating and were staring at me. I laughed and asked what was the matter, whereupon my brother-in-law very seriously asked me to go on. When I finished, they asked me if I remembered the exact time of my dream. I told them in distress, and impressed me so strongly that I noted it down at the time. I pulled out my pocketbook and showed them the date, the 14th day of May, written in pencil. They all arose from the table and took me into the bedroom and showed me written with pencil on the white mantelpiece, 14th of May. I asked them what that meant and was informed that that very night, the only night they ever occupied that room during my absence, my aunt was taking the coals off the fire when my sister screamed out, "Brother has come." My aunt scolded her and said she was dreaming, but she said she had not been to sleep, was sitting up in bed, and saw me enter the room and run out when she screamed. So confident was she that she had seen me, that I had gone off and hidden, that the whole house was thoroughly searched for me. And as soon as day dawned, a messenger was sent to inquire if any vessel had arrived from America, or if I had been seen by any of my friends. No one who visited Otterburn can forget the smiling faces of Negro servants about the house, who received the guests with as true cordiality as did their mistress, expressing their pleasure by widespread mouths showing white teeth, very white by contrast with their jet black skin. And when the guests were going, it's funny how they always want to talk about melanated people's teeth. But by contrast, what would they contrast? European, a lot of English people, not all, but some are known for bad teeth. It's funny that I don't see him just noting, your teeth was very yellow as a contrast to your skin. But again, melanated people, in their estimation, their eyes have to be objectified and become parts and not a whole. So your teeth, your skin, your eyes, your hair, that's objectifying the individual. You're not a whole individual. So as you notice, when the narrative turns towards people, it changes in what is being said. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to add. I'm trying to move through this. One of these, we're on the 11th chapter. This is page 140. One of these Negro women was not only an efficient servant, but a valuable friend to her mistress. In the absence of her master and mistress, she kept the keys, often entertaining their friends, who in passing from different plantations were accustomed to stop, and who received from her a cordial welcome, finding on the table as many delicacies as if the family had been at home. No more sincere attachment could have existed than that between this lady and her servant. At last, when the latter was seized with the contagious fever which ended her life, she could not have had a more faithful friend and nurse than was her mistress. The same fever attacked all the Negroes on the plantation, and none can describe the anxiety, care, and distress of their owners, who watched by their beds day and night, administering medicine and relieving the sick and dying. Chapter 13. What was I reading? Chapter 12? I was bugging out. Sorry. Chapter 12. Now, that was chapter 12? Maybe I'm bugging out. Anywho, chapter 13. I'm going to move through this chapter as well. If you have any questions or comments, like I said, feel free to share. Chapter 13. Among early recollections is a visit with my mother to the plantation of my favorite cousin, not far from Richmond, and one of the handsomest seats of James River. Again, a lot of these names, even though they were breaking away from England, when they first came, they named a lot of the places here after places in England, after places in Europe, like, James River, like Jamestown, like York, before it became New York or New Amsterdam. You see a lot of New England, the whole New England area. all of these places are named after places from where they were coming from. This residence, Howard's Neck, was a favorite resort for people from Richmond and the adjacent counties, and like many others on the river, always full of guests. A round of visiting and dinner parties being kept up from one house to another, so that the ladies presiding over these establishments had no time to attend to domestic duties, which were left to their housekeepers, slaves, while they were employed entertaining visitors. The Negroes on these estates appeared lively and happy. Again, when she comes to the Negroes, it has to be about appearance, because she's not interested. Like they said, they're not interested in what's really going on. And of course, if you're coming into the presence of these Europeans, and we read it in other places, you had to pretend. It's like today when you go into the corporate plantation, you better appear like you like your job. Otherwise, else they'll bring you into the office and tell you it's not working out and you'll be jobless. So even if you're disgruntled, or even if you're discontent with your position, it's still that need to front and pretend in order to not be put in a worse situation. So she goes on to say the Negroes on these estates appeared lively and happy. That is, if singing and laughing indicate happiness. For they went to their work in the field singing, and returned in the evening singing. After which they often spent the whole night visiting from one plantation to another, or dancing until day to the music of the banjo or the fiddle. These dances were wild and boisterous, their evolution being like those of the savage dances described by travelers in Africa. Although the most perfect timidest, their music, with its wild, melancholy cadence, half savage, half civilized, cannot be imitated or described. But today it's being imitated. It sure is, and being perfectly described, and people have adopted it in so many ways. Many a midnight were where we awakened by their wild choruses, sung as they returned from frolic or corn shucking. So sounding at first like some hideous savage yell, but dying away on the air, echoing a cadence melancholy and indescribable, with a peculiar pathos, and yet without melody or sweetness. Corn shucking were occasions of great hilarity and good eating. The Negroes from various plantations assembled at night around a huge pile of corn. Selecting one of their number, usually the most original and amusing, and possessed of the loudest voice, they called him Captain. The captain seated himself on top of the pile, a large light wood torch burning in front of him, and while he shucked, improvised words and music to a wild recitation. Basically, they was having a cipher and he was freestyling, the chorus of which was caught up by the army of shuckers around. The glare of the torches of the black faces with the wild music and impromptu words made a scene curious even to us who were so accustomed to it. After the corn was shucked, they assembled around a table laden with roasted pigs, mutton, beef, ham, cakes, pies, coffee, and other substantials. She's describing, it's funny because we read it a number of narratives where people were starving and that they could not, and a lot of the plantation owners underfed them, and they had to run off in the night to try to steal a little something to eat. And she is making it appear that every day was, quote, their holiday. Every day was these corn shuckings where they had all of this food. Again, the woman is quite unrealistic in her remembrance, but we're going to continue. The laughing and merriment continued until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. But the part about having the slave clubs, let's call them slave clubs, I have read that in many accounts where they would have these clubs. Some plantation owners would allow, some would not. Sometimes they would have to sneak off and have them, but they was jamming, they was clubbing, definitely. And that still goes on today. Let's continue. It says the laughing and merriment continued until 2 o'clock in the morning. Sounds like the club to me. On these James River plantations, distinguished foreigners were often entertained who visited Richmond, desired to see something of Virginia country life. Mr. Thackeray was once a guest at one of these places, but Dickens never visited them. Could he have passed a month at any one of the homes I've described? He would, I am sure, have written something more flattering of Americans and American life than is found in Martin Chuzzlewit, and American Notes. However, with these, I guess she's talking about Charles Dickens, I suppose. However, with these, we should not quarrel, as some of the sketches, especially the one of tobacco chewers, we can recognize. Every nation has a right to its prejudices. Hear this now. Now, everybody that's upset about what's going on to the world today and all of this and all of that, hear what old Latita is saying. Every nation has a right to its prejudices. Certainly the English people have such a right as regards America. This country appearing to English eye like a huge mushroom, the growth of a night, and unsubstantial. But it is surely wrong to censor a whole nation, as some have done the Southern people. Because basically, economically, America just sprung up based on what they were doing and how the thing. So to others who have for a long time got to get to their point, she's saying that in their eyes, you know, a mushroom just springs up like a fungus. It just springs up over there. And you're like, where did this come from? And so again, she's illustrating the beef between America and England. She says, as some have done the Southern people for the faults of a few. Although the right of a nation to its prejudices be admitted, no one has a right without thorough examination and acquaintance with the subject to publish as facts the extravagant account of another nation, but forth by its enemies. But isn't she, what did she just say? Hold on, let me read. No one has a right without through examination and acquaintance with the subject to publish as facts the extravagant accounts of other nations, but put forth by its enemies. So, but she was just able to examine what was going on and now telling the story of when she does touch on, quote, the Negroes or the servants and putting it forth as fact in other areas. But let's continue. The world in this way receives very erroneous impressions. You telling me. For instance, we have no right to suppose the Germans a cruel race because of the following paragraph clipped from a recent newspaper. The cruelty of German officers is a matter of notoriety, but an officer in an artillery regiment has lately gone beyond precedent in ingenuity of cruelty. Some of his men being insubordinate, he punished them by means of spurring process, which constitute in jabbing spurs persistently and brutally into their legs. By this process, his men were so severely injured that they had to go to the hospital. Neither have we a right, and she didn't even tell us where she got that from. She just said a newspaper, but we'll continue. Neither have we a right to pronounce all Pennsylvanians cruel to their helps, as they call them, because a Pennsylvania lady told me the only way she could manage her help, a white girl, 14 years old, was by holding her head under the pump and pumping water upon it until she lost her breath. Okay, they were waterboarding. That's the second instance of waterboarding we heard, because we read that in another narrative. A process I could not have conceived and which filled me with horror. But sorrow and oppression, we suppose, may be found in some form in every clime, and in every phase of existence, some hearts are weary and heavy laden. Even Dickens, whose mind naturally sought and fed upon the comic, saw wrong and oppression in the human institutions of his own land. And Macaulay gives a painful picture of whoever that is, Meme the Arble's life as a waiting maid to Queen Charlotte, from which we are not to infer, however, that all queens are cruel to their waiting maids. So basically, she doesn't want to be generalized, but, you know, in a lot of instances, they don't have any problem just broad brush, you know, all black men are scary, or all black people, quote unquote, black people look alike, you know, all black women with a lot of children are on welfare. But she doesn't want to be judged by the few. But again, this is coming from a same mentality that just said that people have a right to their own prejudices, but at the same time, they shouldn't use their prejudices. So, you know, it's very heavy-handed on one end, but I'll continue. Meme or Madame or whatever D'Arblay, whose maiden name was Frances Burney, was the first female novelist in England who deserved and received the applause of her countrymen. The most eminent men of London paid homage to their genius. Johnson, Burke, Wyndham, Gibbon, Reynolds, Sheridan were her friends and ardent eulogist. In the midst of her literary fame, surrounded by congenial friends, herself a star in this select and brilliant courtier, she was offered the place of a waiting maid in the palace. She accepted the position and bade farewell to the congenial friends and pursuits, and now began, says Macaulay, a slavery of 5 years taken from the best part of her life and wasted in menial drudgery. Listen to how she describes, quote, what she says: slavery, menial drudgery, but yet still the servants appeared happy. The history of an ordinary day was this: Miss Burney had to rise and dress herself early, that she might be ready to answer the royal bell, which rang at 7:30. Till about 8, she attended in the Queen's dressing room, and had the honor of lacing her august mistress' stays, and of putting on the hoop gown and neck handkerchief. The morning was chiefly spent in rummaging drawers and laying fine clothing in their proper places. Then the Queen was to be powdered and dressed for the day. Twice a week, Her Majesty's hair had to be curled and craped, and this operation added a full hour to the business of the toilet. It was generally 3 before Mrs. Burney was at liberty. At 5, she had to attend her colleague, Madame, Schwindelberg, a hateful old toad eater, as illiterate as a chambermaid, proud, rude, peevish, unable to bear solitude, unable to conduct herself with common decency in society. With this delightful associate, Frances Burney had to dine and pass the evening. The pair generally remained together for 5 to 11, and often had no other company the whole time. Between 11 and 12, the bell rang again. Miss Burney had to pass a half hour undressing the Queen, and was then at liberty to retire. Now and then, indeed, events occurred which disturbed the wretched monotony of Frances Burney's life. The court moved from Kew to Windsor, and from Windsor back to Kew. A more important occurrence was the King's visit of Oxford. Then Miss Burney had the honor of entering Oxford in the last of a long string of carriages, which formed the royal procession, of walking after the Queen all day through refectories and chapels, and of standing half dead with fatigue and hunger, while her august mistress was seated at an excellent cold collation. At Magdalen College, Frances was left for a moment in a parlor, where she sank down on a chair. A good-natured equerry saw that she was exhausted, and shared with her some apricots and bread, which he had wisely put in his pockets. At that moment the door opened, the Queen entered, the wearied attendant sprang up, the bread and fruit was hastily concealed. After this, the King became very ill, and during more than 2 years after his recovery, Frances dragged on a miserable existence at the palace. MME Schwillenberg became more and more insolent and intolerable, and now the health of poor Frances began to give way. All who saw her pale face, her emancipated figure, her feeble walk, predicted that her sufferings would soon be over. The Queen seems to have been utterly regardless of the comfort and health, the life of her attendants. Yay! Weak, feverish, hardly able to stand, Frances had still to rise before 7 in order to dress the sweet Queen, and sit up till midnight in order to undress the sweet Queen. The indisposition of the handmaid could not and did not escape the notice of her royal mistress. But the established doctrine of the courts was that all sickness was to be considered as a pretense until it proved fatal. Sounds so familiar. Wow. And I believe this is a European waiting maid that she's talking about. And this is why so much empathy is being poured out. This is why so many descriptive words are used to show that this poor handmaid, because she's speaking about a European. At the same time, the very same thing has been done. But again, those type of sentiments are not shared. I just find that so interesting. Again, we're looking at the psychology. Pay attention to the psychology so that we'll stop getting angry to a certain degree and begin to understand the psychology of the people who you're expecting to, I don't know what some of us are expecting, but let's continue. It says the only way in which the invalid could clear herself from suspicion of malingering, as it is called in the army, was to go on lacing and unlacing until she fell down dead at the royal feet. Finally, Miss Burney's father pays her a visit in his palace prison when she told him that she was miserable, that she was worn with attendance and want of sleep, and that she had no comfort in life, nothing to love, nothing to hope, that her family and friends were to her as though they were not, and were remembered by her as a men remembered the dead. From daybreak to midnight, the same killing labor, the same recreation, more hateful than labor itself, followed each other without variety, without any interval of liberty or repose. So you see, and I just want to stop for a second. You see when the European is in service, and I noticed this in a lot of the accounts, when they have to be put to service, there is a lot of complaining. As you were seeing here, this is not even this woman's complaint, but she's putting it in a way where you can, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're doing that. But when someone else is in service, when someone else is required to get up before can't see to can't see, when somebody else is required to wait on you hand and foot, to a large degree, as we were reading the narratives, there was no consideration. And so we see we see a level of hypocrisy. We see uneven scales as it relates to, as we were reading Blackford, and I had to, because his thing was so monotonous. We didn't see any break for the servants. They worked from Sunday to Sunday. You never, and like she's saying, when someone says that they're sick, he was upset about that because he was losing money. I say that to say, this is the mentality that we're dealing with. Just note and understand. Her father's veneration for royalty, amounting to idolatry, he could not bear to remove her from the court. And between the dear father and the sweet queen, there seemed to be little doubt that someday or other Francis would drop down a corpse. 6 months had escaped since the interview between the parent and the daughter. Interview just mean conversation. The resignation was not sent in. The sufferer grew worse and worse. At least she could have got out. She took bark, but it failed to produce a beneficial effect. She was stimulated with wine. She was soothed with opium, but in vain. Her breath began to fail. The whisper that she was in a decline spread through the court. The pains in her side became so severe that she was forced to crawl from the card table to the old fairy, Meme Schulenberg, to whom she was tethered 3 or 4 times in an evening for the purpose of taking hartshorn. Had she been a Negro slave, a humane planter would have excused her from work. For real? You see how she got the whole thing flipped? She has flipped the whole conversation. Meantime, Harriet Jacobs' aunt dropped dead, had how many over 6 miscarriages because she had a mistress similar to this queen who would not let her rest, let her sleep on the cold floor, and she eventually passed away through the same cruel treatment. But we'll continue. But Her Majesty showed no mercy. Thrice a day, the accursed bell still rang. The queen was still to be dressed for the morning at 7, and to be dressed for the day at noon, and to be undressed at midnight. At last, Miss Burney's father was moved to compassion and allowed her to write a letter of resignation. Still, I could not, writes Miss Burney in her diary, summon courage to present my memorial from seeing the Queen's entire freedom from such an expectation. For though I was frequently so ill in her presence that I could hardly stand, I saw she concluded me while life remained inevitably hers. At last, with a trembling hand, the paper was delivered. Then came the storm. Madame Schwillenberg raved like a maniac. The resignation was not accepted. The father's fear was aroused and declared in a letter meant to be shown to the queen that his daughter must retire. The Schwillenberg raged like a wildcat. A scene almost horribly ensued. Oh, you mean like the way the man, I forgot his name now. Anybody remember the name of the servant from Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl? The name of the master. Because he he stalked her for years. He wouldn't let her go. And she ran away and hid for almost 7 years in the attic. And he stalked her for years. And his name escapes me right now. Mr. Brett was his name. He stalked her for years. So what she's talking about when she's trying to make it look like the English, what she's doing, if you can remember, they have a beef with the English. So she's trying to paint the English like the English were the worst, and that the Southerners actually had more, they actually had more humanity to them. So you have to remember and understand. And after this, you're Mr. Flint. Mr. Flint. So let's continue. Where are we? So, she raged like a wildcat. The queen then promised that after the next birthday, Miss Burney should be set at liberty. But the promise was ill kept, and her majesty showed displeasure at being reminded of it. At length, however, the prison door was open, and Frances was free once more. Her health was restored by traveling, and she returned to London in health and spirits. Macaulay tells us that she went to visit the palace, her old dungeon, and found her successor already far on the way to the grave, and kept to strict duty from morning till midnight with a sprained ankle and a nervous fever. An ignorant and unlettered woman would doubtless not have found this life in the palace tedious, and other sympathy would not have been aroused for her. For as long as the earth lasts, there must be human beings fitted for every position, and it is supposed till the end of all things there must be cooks, handmaids, and dining room servants, which will make it never possible for the whole human family to stand entirely upon the same platform socially and intellectually. Do you understand what's going on here? Like you can't pass your own, cook your own food and make your own things, and Miss Burney's wretchedness, which calls forth our sympathy, there it goes, was not because she had to perform the duties of waiting maid, but because to a gifted and educated woman, these duties were uncongenial. So, of course, you have to keep it ignorant and dumb in order for you to be content with your position. And uncongeniality means happiness. And congeniality means happiness. Uncongeniality, unhappiness. So that is, I feel like I missed a chapter, but nonetheless, we're going to proceed. We're coming up to chapter 14, and that's what we're going to pick up on. We're going to pick up on chapter X15, which means 14 in Roman numerals. For those who don't know or wasn't on when we did the Amazon review of this book, I just want to do the Amazon review of this book real quick, because I did say that we were going to go back there and see what some of the people were saying. And I think I was supposed to read, I'm not sure if I did read the girl's life. If I did read the librarian who was saying that, she was misremembering VIG before the war. It's good to source your material. Hold on one second. A girl's life. All right. Here is the book, right? And we see some reviews here. They gave it 4 stars. I think we read this, or did we? Yeah, I think we read that. Hold on. So one person says, J. Epps says, the book will probably offend many Native and African Americans, but from an objective standpoint, it is a good reference of confirmation. This is what the person says. How is that objective when she's clearly being subjective? The sick mindset of European American settlers and their views of non-white people across the globe are shown clearly in this book. The person says, I found it very interesting. And the title, I didn't even see this part, confirmation of savage psychopathy. And that's what I see it as. I see it as a confirmation of the mentality of individuals. This person says, 1 star, insulting to descendants of American slaves. The person says, and this is why we're reading it. Why? Because we need to understand. Whoa, man, they got me reading a whole nother they got me reading a whole nother thing. I'll read it though. Let's read it. Let's read it. For those who just joined us, we are winding down on A Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War, Part 5. I just wanted to read some reviews so that we can see we're not alone. People are reading this narrative, and it is necessary, again, because it's giving you different views. So I'll go on. The person says, what a horrible book. I can't believe that book like this actually exists. It's an insult to Black people everywhere. This confused, sick woman is actually say that her slave on her plantation weren't threatened as bad as everyone knows. And this is what I was saying. What in the world was she smoking? The insults and the signs of her ignorance begin in the first few pages of the book. She tells the story of how men in the field, women sewing, knitting, weaving, housekeepers in a cabin, with children dancing, romping, singing, jumping, playing around the doors. These form the only pictures to my childhood, pages 1 to 2. This, of course, just really proves the lengths that sinful slaveholders went through to blind themselves into believing that slavery was good for ... These are her memoirs, not the slaves, and didn't even mention that these people were forced to do these things, and sadly tries to paint the picture that the slaves were just like any other family, except that they didn't get paid. Malnutrition was rampant, rape by the master was normal, and Black men couldn't do anything to stop it, and nor could the women of the face being whipped. That part is true. The house were under the constant eye of their master and had to take care of their master's children. But moving on, the person says, and this is from Yoshi 3329. The person says, like I said, malnutrition was common, but this woman claimed bread. This is what I said. Milk, meat, vegetables, fruits, and fuel were plentiful as water in the spring near the cabin door, page 2. Again, she tries to paint that they were well fed and such. Well, maybe on her plantation, but of course the food that slaves had to eat, known today as soul food, not Southern food, okay, I think he's saying, weren't that good. They were parts of the animal, veggies, and fruits that the master's family didn't want to eat. They were leftovers, they were throwaways, they were entrails, with added spices to satisfy the African palate. Slaves sometimes were allowed to grow their own food. Yeah, that's true, on little small patches, but their own time. And if they could, they would sell that food for money to buy their freedom because they didn't like being enslaved. And about the women dabbling in feminine arts, some plantations did do that, granted, but famous Underground Railroad conductor Harriet Tubman, you may have heard of her, had to work just like any other man and was strong as one too, and that's true. You see Harriet Tubman, you see people often speaking about Sojourner Truth was another one. The women had to work just as much as the men and with child. So yeah, let's continue. Let's exclaim some more lies or delusions, depend on how you see it. Of course, she tells the tale of how the blank were always giving her and her sister presents that the cupboards could afford, and how many slaves could read. In my opinion, they were probably giving them items because they wanted something. And this again, the person's giving their opinion, didn't something wrong and wanted to please them, or were grateful because they knew that on any other plantation it would have been worse. She goes on to say that the house servants were numerous, polite, and well trained. Well, I would suspect that you had plenty of house servants when she herself says her family had 100 servants. And it probably never occurred to her that they had to be polite or face being punished. My mother selected those most obliging in disposition and quickest at learning, page 4. Well, of course, the person is going in. Well, of course, they wanted to work in the big house. They got better clothes. Can have the slaves answering the door in rags, can we? Better food. Can't have the slaves looking half dead while waiting on guests. I mean, what would the neighbors think? And got to sleep in a house instead of those slave cabins. The field slaves called home for lack of better term, where it was warm and not prone to drip at night. And they probably got to sleep in a bed instead of pine furniture, page 2. And the biggest reviled of her ignorance is that she says that the slaves always smiled. Well, I for one believe her, they forced themselves to smile, but in reality they were in hell. And what did they receive for waiting on master or master's family, guest, hand and foot? A bowl of ribbon, candy, or some sweet cakes? She laughs and sobs at the same time. I don't know if this is a she or he, but let me continue. This is again a review because it's kind of quiet, so I'm just going to read some reviews. You're welcome, person, kid. You're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome. I'm learning so much as well. This is all putting the little pieces together. And so we're reading some reviews of somebody who apparently has also done some research on slave narratives to understand, like, if you have done research, you know that this woman is full of it. And this is why we need to read these things, because we also have testimonies. I'm probably going to get one where people are like, we just read one. Oh man, this is great. Thanks so much for, letting us know that it wasn't that bad. Black people, get over it. Slavery was over. That was, years ago. This is the mentality. And sometimes people get upset, social media or newspapers, whatever. But you got to understand what you're up against. Their parents may have told them it wasn't that bad. The Negroes are making it up. I mean, come on. Anywho, though I do acknowledge that some slaves were treated better than others, that still didn't justify slavery, which what this sad woman is trying to do. Slavery is slavery. It doesn't matter whether you didn't call the slaves slaves and were horrified of the thought of it. The point is that slaves were living deaths in which they were held captives. And it seemed to me that she has no remorse of what her family did. She doesn't. They were, how many generations? She said 9 generation slave owners. Like, they were some of the original slave owners. So you have to understand this is deeply embedded in her particular family. It says, did to slaves, and writes the book mainly to justify what they did. She claims that her family was doing, quote, God's work, end quote. The only thing possible that came from slavery was that many slaves learned trades, and Christianity, not known in Africa, thought some slave knew trades and professed Christianity before they came here half dead, which Phyllis Wheatley herself said that she was grateful, but even a broke clock is right twice a day. And God always uses wicked and sinful men and women for his glory. Yes, I'm talking about the author and her family. She says, never again will the blank find a people so king and true to them to be as the Southerners have been. So we haven't got to that part yet. So she's giving a little spoiler here. Right, I guess rape, malnutrition, forced to work for no pay unless you count sweetmeats, refuse to issue them their natural right for liberty is what she considers kind. But whatever, I forgives this sad, pathetic author and her family and other like said family. Apparently, they were too lazy, greedy to teach Africans Christianity and trades without whipping, raping, beating, burning, holding them captive, and anything else they wanted to do to them. And the person says they sigh. I guess actually treating them like human beings was just too much for the Southerners of yesteryear's brain to handle. And one last thing. If slavery was just to teach pagan Africans Christianity and trades, why did they insist on making money off of it? Everyone seemed to profit from slavery except the slaves themselves. If they were truly doing God's work, and she scoffs, the person scoffs, they would have never exploited the Africans at all. I could go on of the ignorance of this poor white girl, but I simply do not have the time. I'm a very busy person, the person says. And so, yeah, that is someone, that's Yoshi3329, gave this review on what she thought of the book. I don't know. I keep calling the person a she. The person, I don't know, a person write like a she, but possibly it could or could not be. So once again, we're not done yet. We're going to keep going. I think we read the librarian's review. Somebody says it's a great tour through history, poignant and worth reading, but not for the faint of heart. That's not, again, if you don't know history and you're picking it up here, you might say that. But if you do know history and you're doing a comparative analysis, this person, you'll begin to see that you're being misled with it. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to have to do part 6, this book. Where are we up to here? We're on part 14. So we probably, the next 3 episodes, I know I said that before, the next 3 episodes should be able to take us out through the end of the book if we just double up and just do what we got to do so that we could go into Olado Equiano. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. My name is Amuna Yisrael, Solonamis 101. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow so that I can bust out another 2 or 3 chapters. So with that said, everybody have a blessed night. Shalom. Oh, share the LEV project, by the way. If you're enjoying this, we're almost 10 months, man. This is 9 months and 3 quarters, because October was going to be the beginning of the 10th month. And after that, we're going to have 2 more months to go. And I'm going to wind down on the LEV project because I put a lot of energy out this year. Hopefully it was to edify many people. We can never say, oh man, Black history. And this is only a corner. We only touched the corner, quote unquote, Black history is only 1 month a year. now you can see that it takes endurance to really go into this history. And the first person who needs to learn is the individual. And we have to be committed to this. We have to be committed for our children and the generations to come. And it's not something for the faint at heart. We have to be diligent. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and everybody have a blessed night.